Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast, is brought to you by eMenu Choice Point of Sale and Clark Pro. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. My goal for this podcast: educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By bringing the resident and customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. Today on Tips from Trestle, I'm chatting with Joanna LaFleur. As a fiercely passionate advocate for those with dementia and their caregivers, Joanna is a truly powerful speaker and impactful trainer sharing a transformative message. After receiving a degree in recreational therapy from Eastern Michigan University, she jumped into the elder care field headfirst and has worked with people living with dementia and their caregivers for 2 decades. Joanna's strong desire to create positive change in this area can also be felt through articles, videos, social media content, and frequent corporate training and speaking engagements. Joanna, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Thanks so much for having me.
So when we first met to talk about a podcast episode, one of the things that I feel like it's talked about a little bit when we think about dementia care and dementia support is meal times. But I see a lot of people talking about everything else, and I see just a little bit of pieces here and there. And so with your background and your experience, I was wanting to dive in, kind of thinking about mealtime, how to really take the things that you do in your background and really give our listeners some opportunities to really create a successful environment and a successful experience. And so first and foremost, how important from your vantage point is mealtime in a memory care neighborhood? And how does that contribute to a resident's overall well-being?
I mean, I think the thing is one thing that we all enjoy in life is food, right? And people with dementia don't have as many things as they used to really get excited about or enjoy. And so I always felt like food was one of those things that we needed to do the right way to give them something to look forward to give them something to really enjoy, to create socialization, and also to increase appetite and hydration, which can be an issue in dementia care.
Yeah, I know from my experience that it all often seems like operators a lot of times overlook mealtime, right? Because they're so focused on, unless it's standalone memory care, it's just one more aspect of the community. It's just another neighborhood with IL and AL. And so there's this sometimes overlooked aspect of it. And so when you think about that and think about your expertise in creating this perfect environment or as close to perfect as possible. So when you think about all of that, how do you, in your experience, having been a former operator, how do you tailor food and dining experiences to meet those individual resident needs and preferences, especially in a dementia neighborhood?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, first of all, in the assessment process to really understand the mealtime experience for the person. Yes, we want to know preferences. We want to know what's in their coffee and how they like their eggs cooked and things like that. But we also want to know, did they like to listen to music during a meal, or did they always have a glass of wine with a meal, or what was something that they did in their family? Did they always pray before their meal? Those little things. It's important to be able to, because those are clues and cues to people with dementia that, like, okay, it's time for me to eat, right? And
Yeah.
like, I know for one thing, we had a resident who wasn't eating breakfast, and we were like getting really concerned because he wasn't eating breakfast. We're like, we're gonna have to do a meal replacement. We're gonna have to figure something out. And so we were talking to his wife, and we were like, hey, so, he's not eating breakfast. And she's like, well, are you seasoning the food? And we're like, well, I mean, yeah, we put like salt and pepper and stuff on him. And she's like, no, that's not seasoning food. That we need like some paprika and some other spices like that. And so we were like, okay, well, let's try that. So the next day, that's what we did. And he ate the entire breakfast.
Oh, wow.
And so I
Yeah.
just think really like communicating both before they move in and during the process, if they're not eating, also like how can we change? How can we improve? What are we doing wrong here?
Yeah, and that makes me wanna ask you a follow-up. What would you say to operators? Because you were in a smaller setting where you could do a little bit more of that individualization. What would you say, though, to somebody who has 24, 32, 44, whatever a much larger neighborhood about that personalization when they think, "Maybe I can't do that," or, "It's just too much to work through." What would you say to those operators about why that's so important?
I mean, I think we eat with our eyes, and food in mealtime is supposed to be super exciting and fun, right? And so I think, we're really doing our people with dementia a disservice if we're not finding out what makes their mealtime fun, because that's literally like another activity. I mean, they're only awake during activities and meals. That's an opportunity to give them quality of life. So I think finding any way possible to make that happen for them. I know for us, for some of the residents that we had that were really on a specific diet or very like particular about some of the things that they ate or drank, we would have the family bring in those things for them specifically. Because like one person would only eat, let's say, unsalted butter or like this one specific brand of cookie right after every meal or something. So we would have the families bring the stuff in. And so it didn't come out of our budget. And the families were totally willing to do that if they wanted something very specialized like that. So I think getting other people involved, and I think also getting your staff and your community excited about mealtime. Sometimes we can consider it like just one more thing that we have to do for the day. And it's like, we got to get everyone fed. We got to get everyone out of here in a certain time so we can do the next thing. But we're missing out on like the quality and the fun and the enjoyment that can come from that eating experience.
Yeah, you make a great point there when you talk about like the residents are needing to be engaged, and they're usually mealtime is a really big opportunity for engagement. And so, one thing I'm curious about is when you think about mealtime, it's not just the nutritional aspect of mealtime that's so important. There's also the socialization and kind of being with your neighbors and with a group of people. That's important in any part of dining from my vantage point. So,
Yeah.
what are some strategies that you would employ that our listeners could employ to really encourage more socialization and engagement with residents during mealtime?
Well, I think the first thing is the seating chart if you have one, right? I think it's important to make sure that people are surrounded by people that they can talk to that are at the same level communication wise as they are. And then having staff, as many staff as possible in to help. At some facilities I've been at, they had all the managers come in during mealtime and each person sat like at a table to help foster the communication because it can be challenging for them to keep it going, right? They can say, "Hi, I'm Joanna. Nice to meet you." And then it's hard for them to keep going, depending on their level of dementia, where they're at with it. So I think having as many people involved as possible. And I also think that it's super important to make sure that, the location wise it works for people and that you put people together that have like interests or abilities.
Yeah, and I think the likabilities makes a lot of sense, but I think it's the other things when you think about like their personal interests and creating that engagement around people that they can relate to. Oftentimes, I think that gets overlooked in the
Mhm.
process because they get really focused on the care aspect, the where are they at in their progression of the disease, and we don't think about well, yes, these two residents are on the same level, but one grew up in the city and one grew up on a farm, and they probably have nothing in common to talk about. So it makes no sense for them to come together. And so, one other piece of this that I think is always interesting is thinking about not just mealtime, but food in general. Like, how does what kind of role does that play in the way you do activity programming, or maybe even kind of the therapeutic aspects of what happened in a memory care neighborhood? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think, using the 5 senses is probably one of the best things you can do in activities. And I mean, we really do people have memories through smells, through taste, through sounds. And so I think it's really important, like even when you're doing group activities that you can integrate food into those as well. we used to do a lot of baking,
Mm.
and we would have not just our female residents, but even our male residents really interested in helping us with that and really proud of what they did because that creates meaning and purpose then after that. So I think so many things in our homes really did relate around food because if you think about it, food makes almost everything better. Like
Absolutely.
every party you plan, after exercise, hydration, and different things like that, like, there's just so many ways to introduce it into it that can create memories and moments and those kind of things that make the residents' days better.
Technology continues to drive changes in senior care, and that includes food service. eMenu Choice is an award-winning point-of-service application for managing the dining function in senior living communities. This mobile, touchscreen-enabled software enhances the dining experience for residents while streamlining processes for staff. The flexibility and functionality of eMenu Choice makes it an effective solution for any type of senior living environment, from independent and assisted living to skilled nursing facilities. It works for production kitchens or restaurant-style service with options for per meal or a la carte pricing and accommodates a variety of payments, including bill to account, meal credits, and credit cards. Created by a senior care provider with more than a century of experience serving older adults, eMenu Choice eliminates communication barriers between staff and residents while enabling person-centered choices and greater resident satisfaction. eMenu Choice, transforming dining for senior living.
I think you make a great point. One operator I worked with, we had created, it was a standalone activity, and it was almost, they have this like sensory box program where they would do specialized activities. And we created this kind of combination of like herbs of the week or herbs of the month where we would pair up like rosemary and garlic or ginger and thyme, and we would create that, and we would tie that then into maybe a food demonstration later in the week or some sort of snack or something that we did. And what we found was kind of like what you're saying, the engagement was really high on that because it was all about all of the senses, right? Because you had the touch and the smell with one, but
Mhm.
then later on you're tasting and even maybe creating that item. And so it's kind of that once you're in the kitchen, everybody wants to be a part of the process kind of mindset, which I think is really great.
Yeah, definitely.
When you think about those kinds of things, right? We're talking about the dining room, but also maybe some of these kinds of activities where we're engaging residents with food. How do you ensure that the environment is safe, comfortable, even maybe dementia friendly for our residents so that way they can participate and be engaged with what's going on and not necessarily have to worry about the surroundings being a problem?
Yeah. I think, people with dementia typically do better with us in a smaller space with less distractions because they can be really easily distracted. So we would try to do things like in smaller groups with as many helpers as we could using volunteers and other people like that. So we could do it. And then what we would do is we would really sort of make it a group activity, but also a one on one activity because we would go around the room and have each person do one thing that whatever it was. And
Mm.
I think a lot of times, we kind of overprotect people with dementia sometimes,
Yeah.
and we don't let them help with things like peeling something or using a paring knife to cut something or, helping, even, spray the pan and help put it in the oven or turn the oven on. Like there's stuff that you can do if you're there with them and overseeing it that they can still do those things. And then that can create that meaning and purpose I was talking about earlier too.
Yeah, I talk to operators about those kinds of activities, and I would imagine, not being a dementia professional myself, but I've always kind of sensed and seen that by doing that, you can kind of create not just, better engagement for the resident, but it kind of also it slows down their progression a little bit. And maybe I'm wrong. I'd love your take on this, but getting them engaged in not just like preset activities like we're talking about with like the sensory box or that, but actually like, hey, this is your home. This is part of what would happen while you're living here. That almost makes it a better environment. And I think your point about overprotection also plays into that. And so how do we convince operators that when they need to take and kind of stretch what they're comfortable with a little bit to really do that, but still have what they think is a safe and comfortable environment.
Yeah. I think, we really need to think about people with dementia as human beings and like think about what we would like, right?
Mm,
So, I mean, it is nice to like go on a cruise or go on a vacation and get served everything to you for like a short amount of time. That's nice, right?
right.
But eventually it gets to be like, well, what am I supposed to be doing here? Like, well, what's my purpose kind of thing. And you hear people with dementia say those things like, what am I doing here? And I'm so crazy and I can't do anything for myself and, have those things. And because we're taking them away. So I think it's really important that we think if we really have empathy and putting ourselves in our people with dementia shoes. If I was in this scenario, would I want to help, feed the fish once a day or,
Yeah.
help set the table or, help put the cookies on the tray when they need to bake? Stuff that, little things that they can do to help. And if they do it wrong or if they do it poorly or whatever, just redo it after. Once they leave, then you can adjust it. But I think, if to not do it, we're not giving our people like autonomy, we're not giving them purpose and meaning,
Mm.
and we're not giving them engagement or, generally quality of life if they're not being able to really support and do the things that they want. And I see that even with men, so a lot of people struggle with activities for men, like, well, they don't like
Right.
these kind of things. But you got to get creative with it. I mean, like we would do on say like Coca-Cola Day, we would go out and get like four different types of Coke and use the little small glasses and have them taste test each one and just name it like 1 through 5, which is the best one, and just have like a
Mhm.
taste test so everyone could be involved. I try to do that with my men cooking, and like even if someone doesn't want to be involved in cooking, they can read the directions or, they can help turn the stove on. They can be the person that kind of tells people what to do. So there's something for everyone in that. But I think, really thinking about it in an empathetic way will change the way we do things.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about earlier about understanding how not just like food preferences, but like the experiences and like the things that went around mealtime and kind of doing that deeper dive and understanding the resident better. I think you've got some great examples in there of like there's going to be tasks that some people are familiar with and some that aren't. And you can probably find a way to engage all of your residents if you do that deeper dive. And so when you think about the staff supporting these things, how do you train the staff to understand and meet those resident needs, dementia? I think that's a big area that a lot of people in the industry are working on. But from your vantage point, what does that look like and how can that be successful?
I mean, I think people don't know what they don't know, right? And so I think giving examples and actually putting them in the place of a resident and putting you in the place of the caregiver and showing them what it looks like to stand over someone and help assist them with eating while you're standing there, right?
Yeah.
Or to sit at a table with someone and have that person not be eating, but you're supposed to eat. Like if you really help them understand what the person's kind of going through, then it helps them. It does make a change in their brain. And then things like, giving them talking points and giving them like we used to do like a trivia or fun facts or a poem or something at every mealtime so that the caregivers would have something to talk about. Because sometimes it can be difficult for them to come up with the things and try to keep the conversation going. But if they have something that they can talk about, then they can say, well, Joe, what do you think about Coca-Cola Day? Did you select those Coke commercials back in the day? Or Susie, what do you like, Coke or Diet Coke? Or Johnny, have you ever tried that vanilla Coke that they have? Do you think that would taste good? So that you can get everyone involved, but giving them the necessary teaching tools and then giving them the regular tools that they need to be able to succeed in that.
Yeah, and I wonder if I think about like residents who are maybe more, highly engaged than ones that aren't. Sometimes you can kind of see caregivers and staff maybe gravitate towards the ones that are more engaging than less. And so, have you seen anything that really helps those caregivers understand the how to reach out and connect with all levels of dementia?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I teach is just something really basic, which is like connecting by like making a funny face with them or, doing something like figuring out what you can do with with people that are a little bit less functioning to get them engaged and getting them talking, and using the yes or no questions or the closed-ended questions can help you engage. And then you're sometimes surprised at what they can do. And I think another thing is we're way too quick to start feeding people
Mm,
instead of giving them clues and hand over hand assistance and things, or changing the way that they eat the food that they can still do it independently.
yeah, no, those are both really great tips. And I've definitely seen how those can be successful in the settings. And so before we go, I wanted to give our listeners a little bit more information about you and your foundation. Obviously, you do a lot of work with dementia and training. And so I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, how it came about, and kind of tell us the story and how it supports the industry.
Yeah, so I think, I was in operations for 10 years for my own company. I had 3 homes, and I had a home care company. And what I really saw in doing that was, like, we helped so many people, but there was so many people we couldn't help because they didn't have the financial means to be able to utilize our services.
Yeah.
And I don't think it should be a thing that only people that have the means should get good dementia care. And I think that's unfortunately something that people are struggling with right now in the world. We're all struggling with that. And I wanted to be a solution to that. And so I wanted to create Memory Lane Foundation to do the education both with families and with communities and with caregivers, and also to provide consultations, care consultations. Families, when they get a diagnosis of dementia, it's really like all they get is the diagnosis portion.
Uh,
They don't get, like, well, what am I supposed to do when my mom does this? Or how do I handle, some of these difficult things that can happen sometimes? Well, how should I respond? Or what if they're trying to leave the house or drive the car they're not supposed to drive? Like, so many things that people just don't know, even basic hygiene things, how to handle it or why they're doing things. So it's really about doing that one-on-one with care consultations with families. And then we also provide grief support, which is throughout the process, not just at the end. And then resources to caregivers, including some financial resources to try to help pay for things that people really do need in their homes.
yeah, no, I think it's a great service you guys provide. And so, how can listeners learn more about the foundation? How can they connect with you to get your services, or even maybe just ask you a question about any of the things we've talked about today?
Yeah, I mean, have a big social media following. I'm on Facebook, TikTok are my biggest ones, but I'm also on LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube. So you can look my name up, Joanna LaFleur or Joanna Dementia Expert. And then my website is www.mlfnd.org. So mlfnd.org. So then more information is on there, and I have some videos kind of explaining what I do. And you can sign up for my newsletter that I do every month. And I also do a webinar every month that I'm starting this month. So
Perfect. Well, great. Well, Joanna, I thank you so much for your feedback and letting us kind of dig into this, this kind of under reviewed and under talked about mealtime and bringing like support for residents to it. And thanks so much for being here today on Tips from Trestle.
yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
So there it is, everybody. Another one in the books. Thanks again for tuning in. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestle. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.